Hi and welcome back to the next video. This is video number 10 and here we'll do just some NestJS refactoring where we refactor all our observables to async await, and we will also add like a search by username. So with this we have then a new get endpoint where we can find users by username, what we will need to add later users to our chat room. So then we can search them by username and then add them to our chat room in our Angular front end, which will be done like in next videos. And we also like refactor our before insert and before update for our user entity, where we now make sure that the email and username are always before insert or update are changed to lowercase so that it's easier to find. And here we do have our structure. This is as always, we look at the video outcome, then we read the user story for this, and then we implement the story and close it. So let's have a quick look what we are doing in this video here, or what is the outcome. So you can see here we have like refactored our NestJS API to use now all async await. So for example, in our user service, we are everywhere we are using async await and not the observables anymore. We made sure that all our requests that were working before are still working. So this is all fine. And now also if we insert like a new user into our database, so you can see it here. This was uppercase here, this S, and here also. We insert it now to lowercase. And we have a new endpoint where we can search our users by username. So for example, when we give him the T, then we find there is a T in the username. So here for Thomas, for Walter, and so on. And if we query for a large T or a small t, this always gets to lowercase. I could also query for like an S, for example, and then I'm just getting Thomas and Sam in return. So this is needed for the next videos where we want to add like chat room creation in our front end, and there we have to specify, we search the users by username from our backend to add like users to our chat rooms. So let's have a quick look at our story here for this video. So here we are in video 10, and this is about NestJS. We want to refactor our observables to async await, and we want to implement our username search. So the story is very simple. So as a developer, I want to refactor our observables to async await so that our API code is like consistent. We also want to add like an endpoint to our user controller to search for a user by his username. And we also want to refactor our code so that we only save users with email and username to lowercase. So at the moment, we have this as before insert, but this is not working, so we have to check this and modify it a bit so that it works, so that we only save the email and the username in lowercase in our database, so we make it easier to find it later. And so to have the user controller search by username is for the room creation later in the front end in the next video, because there we need to get the user by username to add them then to a specific chat room. And so we have to implement this now in our backend. So the criteria are, we want to refactor the observables to async await. We want to have like a new get endpoint to search by username. This could be get API users find by username. And we want to refactor our user creation so that our users email and username gets inserted as lowercase. So you see we have already Docker compose up, so our application is running. And as you see, when we try to get here all the users, and first we need again our token. So if I log in with one user, then you see, give me 1 second, that we can get the user, and you see we have here also users, whereas the username and the email not to local lowercase, so that we have to fix this. So let's first start by making everything a refactor from async to async await. So let's maybe start in our authentication module. And now we have some errors here in the console, I think, but yeah, we will fix this step by step. So we have now async generate JWT, and now we want to return a promise and not an observable. So we can remove our from, and we can also completely remove it from here. So then we also want to return here an observable and promise. And also here. So then all our stuff in our user service is probably going wrong. So we have to refactor this. So we can now go to our user service and modify everything here. So you see validate password is now going wrong. So now we have to make this async and we want to return like a promise. So we say this.outService.compare passwords. And then here for the hash password, we also want to return like a promise. So we can say async. And then we do this. And then everything here is going also wrong. So first let's change all here, the smaller functions, not the login and the create, to using promise. And then we refactor the stuff above. So we say here also async. And we have our find by email, also returning promise. And so simply we have to remove the conversion from our, with the from the promise to observable. So we just have to change this. And then we have to modify this here also to promise. And we say async. And then we want to say const user is await this. And then we check our user repository. We make find one by email. And then if our user exists, we want to return true, else we want to return false. So now we have here, I think, all the smaller functions, methods, we have it async. And now we can refactor the stuff here. So maybe start with create. And so we now want to return like a promise. And we can also wrap this in a try catch. And so first, like we do here, we want to check if the user exists. So we can say const exists. And then we await this dot mail exists, new user dot email. And so this here is not async, I think, or is it async? I have to make it as async. Then we can say if it is not existing. Then we say const password hash is like a string. And here we say await this dot hash password, new user dot password. So if the user is not existing, then we can create him. If he is existing, then we say user already exists. So here we can go into our else and we can like throw HTTP exception. And we can say email is already in use. And we can also throw the C and the catch block. And so if the email is not existing, then we have our password hash that we get. Then we can say new user dot password, and then we override this with the password hash. So because we only want to store the hash from the database, and then we want to like create the user, and then we can say this dot user repository dot save. And now to refactor this, that we also make it to lowercase, we have to first create this. So we say create, and then we insert our new user. And we also have to use here wait. And then we can return this .find1, because here we will get it in return with the password. But when we make a simple select, since we removed or disabled the select here in the user entity, the password, we set select false by default if we don't specific want it, like we do it here, because we then needed to compare on login. But here with the find1, it's not selected by default, so we're not returning it. And then we can simply go by user.id. So now this should work, and we can remove all the stuff here. And now we can also refactor our login stuff. So we have to say async. And now we want to make a promise, and we can also comment out everything here. So we can again wrap this in a try catch. And then we can like throw here new HTTP exception. And now on login, we first, like here before, we want a user or to find the user by email. So we can say const found user is await this dot find by email, and then we have our user dot email. And then we can also say here always to lowercase, so that we don't have any issues, because we now, as you remember, stored like lowercase in the database. So we have to modify this. And we can say if we found our user, we want to do something, and else we also want to do something. So else we can say we want to throw unauthorized. And if we found a user, we want to get like the payload for signing our token, or that we add to our token as a payload. So we can just name it payload, and we can await this dot find1, and then we just take found user dot id, because we can't use this user here by find by email. I think because here we are also returning the password. And of course, before we have to check if our passwords are matching. So we say const matches, which is like a basic boolean. And here we can say await this dot validate password. And then we have our user password here. User dot password. And then we check this against our found user password from the database. So this here is the hash from the database that we got here. And this here is the password that is providing. So we check this, and this validate password is awaiting the password and then the stored password hash. And then we compare it with our authentication service with bcrypt, which takes like the password that the user entered and compares it against the stored password hash. So we can go back here. So now we have here our mattress boolean, and then we can say if mattress. So if mattress is true, then we can get like the payload, or else we can also throw like an exception. And if we have like the payload, then we want to generate our JWT with this. So then we can say return this dot authentication service. And then we want to generate our JWT. and here we want to have our user, so which is our payload, and then we return it. So this is like basic refactoring of this stuff here. Now we can save, and now all the errors should be gone, and we can remove all the imports for observables. Yeah, this goes away, give it some time. And now we also have to like refactor our controller, but before we can refactor our user helper stuff, so we can simply say we want to return here a user interface, and we return the auth, and the same goes here. And then we can remove this here also. And now we have to check our controller. What is here, what's going wrong, what's going right probably. So first we have our create function. So in our create, let's comment this out. We want to return like a promise. And then we have simply first our user entity. So we can say const user entity, and this is our user helper service dot create user DTO entity. And here we just get our create user DTO. And then we can return this dot user service dot create. And here we use our user entity. So later we have to check with Postman if all the requests are still valid and working, and then this should be fine. So for this here, we also want to return a promise. Make it async. And then we can just say this.userService.findAll, since we modified this, so this seems to be fine. And then we have our login, and here we also want to have first our user entity, so we can say const user entity, and then this is our user helper service dot login user DTO to entity, and here we get it our login user DTO. And we can also say here this is like user interface, and this here also. And then at next we can just return our stuff here that we need to do. So now we have our JWT, which is like a basic string. And for this we can call this dot user service dot login, and we give him like our user entity. Now what is it saying? User service dot login. Normally, let's give it some time. Maybe this will work. Ah, we have to make it async. Error mistake. And now we have to change this to promise. And then we can make our return our login response interface object. And now we can remove this here. So we have our user helper service. We created the entity from the DTO. We log in here. We get the JWT back, and then we just sign, or we get in return like our user interface login response, the access token with the JWT, the token type, and the expires in time. So we can remove this here. Now we can see if we have any errors here. So now everything looks good. And now we can also remove, I think, the imports that we don't need anymore. Are we using this? I don't think so. We can also remove the observables and the map and the switch map. And then it is still compiling. So let's check if we have any more errors here. Seems good. And now in our user entity, we can also switch it up a bit. So we have here before insert, and we can also add before update. And then we also want to have like this dot username gleich this dot username dot to lowercase. And for this to work, the entity must first be created. So here in our user service, we now use before we save, we create the entity. And then we can save it, and then these before insert and before update will fire and start ever and modify this. So this should be fine now, I think. So now we can try with Postman to send the request and see if everything still works. So we have our login request. We are still getting in return our access token, our token type the expires in. When we query for our users, we are still getting in return all our users. And when we create like a new user, so let's give it here like an uppercase email, we could say, what can we use? We can use sam@sam.com, and username is also, let's say, SAM. And we have the basic password. Let's try to create. So was created. Now you see here, it's to lowercase, and the email is also to lowercase. So now we make it easier for us to log in and find everything. So it seems like all our API requests are still working. So now we can implement like finding a user by his username. So for this, we can go to our controller, and we add like a new endpoint to find by username. So we can just add it here. Maybe we can do this here a bit. Yes, this looks a bit better. So we can make here like also async, and we can say find all by username. And then we can make here also get request, and we can say, for example, this goes against find by username. And then we have here like a query parameter. And this will be our username. And then we can just use this as username as type string. And then we can say return this dot user service dot find by, or say find all by username. And then we give him here the username. And now we have to create this function here. So we go into our user service. And then we need like a basic function that is searching for the username, or for users by username. Yeah, so I think we can say async, and then how did we name it? We can say find all by username, and then we have our username, which is a string, and we want to return like a promise, and then we want to return like many users, so like an array. And then we can simply say return this dot user repository dot find, and then we can pass in some options. So we can say where, and then we want to query our username, and we can simply say like. We import this from type ORM, and then we need to use the backticks, and then we can say here like a wildcard. Then we give him the username, and then we add like another wildcard so that we can find everything when we search for the letter T, when we find everything like Thomas, or where it's at the end and so on. So we can now see here the error should be gone, and we can now check with Postman if we are able to query this. So when we make like a new request, like a GET request with localhost 3000/API/users, and then we say find by username. When we get unauthorized, so we need like the token to authorize us. So as you remember, we have here our Nest middleware that is checking all the normal HTTP requests if we have like a valid JWT and if the user exists in the database. Otherwise, we don't we get unauthorized. So when we add this here as a bearer token, and then we send again, so we get like an empty array. But if we add, for example, some query parameters username, and then we just say, for example, T, then you get all where's T in the username. So here, for example, Thomas, Walton, and Walter. So yeah, I actually don't know if this is going with uppercase, so there we don't get anything. But since we are going to have it all to lowercase, this should not be an issue, but we can also say username.to lowercase, since we remember that we make everything to lowercase, all new users that we create now. So now when we search for big T, we also get this here. So always remember that when you now try this here, that you maybe have to delete all your database entries or just reset the images and containers and then start again and register new users, so that then it's all made to lowercase. So I think this was already it for this video. So now we can check against our user story here if we have done everything. So we have refactored our stuff to async await. If there's maybe another error that I didn't catch, when we will make it in the next videos, then we see it. We have like a new endpoint where we search by username, so get API users find by username. And we have refactored our user creation so that now users' email and username get inserted to lowercase into our database. So we now can stop here our Docker Compose, our container, and we can say git add upper A, and we can commit all the changes. And this is video 10. And here we refactored observables to async await and implemented NestJS username search. And we can push it.